Thank you very much, Saskia, and thank you, of course, to the entire CPA. I loved Bettina's description of the 3 goals of the CPA, one of them being fundraising, this is incredible, the amount of money that was raised last year. But the other 2 being perhaps more important, one being, as she said, the army of qualified volunteers who do everything at the school, as you've just heard, through all of these wonderful opportunities, and the other being to be the community of Chadwick parents. I'm thinking about it now, this is my 17th year and final year as a Chadwick parent, and therefore as a member of the CPA, and as I think back over those years, I have, of course, incredibly fond memories and thoughts about all the students, but also about the parents who have created such a strong community that abides with us from year to year, from the time that Mrs. Chadwick founded the school as a homeschool to the point that we are at now, almost 80 years later. So I want to thank Saskia for last year's spring event and for this event, and Meg Lenahan for a wonderful leadership last year, and Bettina Gasaris for already getting us off to such a great start this year. So last year, some of you remember, we did a survey of our parents to get feedback about how we were doing. And many of you took part in it, and we really appreciate that. And we had several big takeaways from that survey. One of the really positive ones was that our parents really understand and embrace the 3-part mission statement that we have that has to do with academic excellence, the development of exemplary character, and self-discovery. That the parents really liked the fact that the school was holistic and well-rounded. We also got a big pat on the back for the second 2 of those things, where parents said they really understood the exemplary character part, and they felt that having the core values and all the programs that we have really do a bang-up job, and that the self-discovery through all the opportunities, some of which you heard about this morning, really does an amazing job of bringing out the best in our students. But what also came out was the need for us to articulate more clearly what we mean by academic excellence. So that's what I get to talk about today. And as I look back over it, this is the 17th time I've gotten to speak to the CPA, and it's really the first time I've ever spoken directly about academic excellence. So I'm happy to do so. So our mission has these 3 parts. So over the summer, I had lunch with our new incoming board chair, Mark Woodruff, who's a former Chadwick parent, and he drew me a little diagram that had mission over here, and it says why we exist, and vision over here, which is what do we want to do, who do we want to be, and in between our strategies. So today I want to talk about the academic excellence part of our mission, and then talk about at least my vision for where we want to be in terms of academic excellence. The fact of the matter is that while we are college prep throughout, we are also life prep. We're also citizenship prep. We're also relationship prep. So we have a multifaceted set of targets. And we simply do not have time to segment our mission and to say that, for example, Monday and Wednesday we'll work on academic excellence, Tuesday, Thursday we'll do character, and Friday we'll do self-discovery. We can't do that. We have to have all parts of our programs working together to hit all 3 parts of our mission statement to the extent that we possibly can. The fact of the matter is that the bar has been raised on the academic side of things from when we were in school. When we were in school, I'll speak for myself, when I was in school, the primary objectives, at least going through high school, were to have good grades and to have high test scores. Those objectives have not gone away, but they have been added to because of the needs of the world around us and the future for which we are preparing. Many of you have heard the now very familiar refrain about 21st century skills, which many of us, I think, believe look a lot like 20th century skills, but with certain additions. One person who's compiled them, as you've heard, if you've been in this meeting before, you've heard me talk about several, I think, really cornerstone documents and research studies. One of them was College Knowledge by David Conley from the University of Oregon, who did a study of what it is you really need to go to basically the top 20 or 40 colleges in the United States. One of them was Tough Choices or Tough Times, which was a blue ribbon panel about the future of the economy and education. One is How People Learn by the National Research Council of the National Science Foundation. Derek Bach, from the president of Harvard, wrote a book entitled Our Underachieving Colleges about higher ed. And then last, and the one I want to cite today is by Tony Wagner from Harvard, called The Global Achievement Gap, and basically why even our best schools aren't delivering what they need to. He synthesized the 7, what he calls survival skills, which as you hear them will sound, I think, a lot like our 6 core competencies. 3 are the traditional ones: critical thinking and problem solving, effective oral and written communication, and accessing and analyzing information. That's really the sort of the cognitive side of things. But then there are 4 more, which again, I don't think is what our education, when we were students, I don't think that's what our education was headed towards, and it's now what our children really, really need to master. One is collaboration across networks and leading by influence. 5th is agility and adaptability. 6th is initiative and entrepreneurialism. And last but not least, curiosity and imagination. So basically, the challenge for schools and for students now is to hit all of the, quote, old targets in ways that also enable them to develop the skills that are in the last 4 targets. And that's where, in our mission statement, in the first sentence, there are the 3 goals that I talked about, and then it says how. It is through experience. This is where experience comes in, because it helps bind together all of those cognitive and non-cognitive factors. It also happens to have been fundamental to Mrs. Chadwick's philosophy. She said back in 1937, experience is the best of all possible educations. The curriculum should consist of experiences. So you as parents, as you see what your children are doing across the span, should understand that this is intentional. Experiences, educational experiences, can be both planned and unplanned. So I shared with the faculty at the beginning of the year 2 experiences that I had when I was in high school. One of them was planned. So the high school I went to was a boarding school in New Hampshire, and it started at the 9th grade. So all of us were coming from somewhere else. And we were probably selected to attend there because we had done well in school up until that point. And doing well in school, I went to public school. Doing well in school meant that you read the homework, and then you answered the questions at the end of the chapter or something like that, and you got a grade, and if you got straight A's, that was good. So our very first day, so we all arrived, 9th graders from all over the country and some of us from around the world, and we arrive, and in the first day in history class, the teacher says, your homework for tonight is to go to the town graveyard. The town had been founded back in the 17th century. Go to the town graveyard and come back tomorrow with a report on what you found out. And I pardon my language, but this is what he said, and don't bring me anything crappy. So we all sort of looked dazed, like, where's the textbook? What chapter am I supposed to read? Aren't there some questions I'm supposed to answer? We had absolutely no idea what the heck we were supposed to be doing in the town graveyard. So we all trooped off. Well, of course, you can imagine what we found in the town graveyard. We were able to deduce things like economic upswings and downturns. We were able to deduce when there had been famines. We were able to deduce when there had been big medical and health problems. There were all kinds of things we were able to figure out. But that was a very carefully planned experience that made us do what historians do, which is to go to the primary sources, form a hypothesis, double check it against evidence, and come to an understanding not just of the facts of that, because after all, what happens in Exeter, New Hampshire isn't that vitally important, but master the skills and the thought process that historians need. I have an example of another experience that I had at the same high school that was unplanned. I had biology every day at 5:25 with a group of equally uninterested students. 5:25 is a nightmarish time to have biology after football practice. That's when it was. None of us cared particularly about what was going on in the class. I'm sorry, I'm married to a biologist, but that's the truth. So at any rate, so we lollygagged our way through these things, and the way that the thing was set up was there was a demonstration lab at the front, and then the professor, who was had a PhD and all of that, would go through the lab, and then we would replicate it. Well, he knew how the whole thing was going to come out all the time. Well, one day, he comes in, and somehow or other, I can't remember whether it was fruit flies or something, but he massively messed up the demonstration and the experiment. And then he didn't know what to do. So he just stood there and he said, I've ruined the experiment. I've ruined the experiment. I don't know what to do. And his classroom connected to the department chair, Dr. Polychronis, and he said, Dr. Polychronis is going to come in, and I've ruined it. Well, that was the only time the whole year he actually had our attention. So all of us came up to the front of the table and we're all huddled around it like, oh no, Dr. Ziklas, maybe if you do this, it'll work. Well, it was the only time when we actually got involved because there was a real live, authentic question on the table, which is how do we resurrect this failed experiment? But when we were just doing the experiment, replicating what he did, that was of no interest whatsoever. But we now actually had to be called upon to do something that was real. It was authentic. We weren't just following a playbook. So that's the example of, even in a highly academic, highly goal-driven school, at the highest level in the high school, you can build in experiences that are enormously educative. Here I am. I mean, that happened, well, I was a freshman in 1966, so that happened a long time ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday, and I can't tell you how much else I remember about biology. So at any rate, that's why you hear us talk about experiences, because it's extremely powerful. Now, it does look different across the 13 grades. I remember John Fisk, our middle school director for many years, used to talk about the rainbow of going from kindergarten across to 12th grade, that it won't look the same in the kindergarten as it does in the 12th grade. And obviously in the village school, and many of you were there last night, and I hope heard wonderful things about what your children are doing in the village school. In the village school, you have more opportunity to have hands-on, experiential, multidisciplinary kinds of activities, and less, quote, content of things that you're supposed to remember, other than things like math facts and so forth. Whereas when you get into the high school, in part because of the fact that there will be standardized tests, and in part because of the fact that you actually do need to know some things, in terms of you know, I used to teach French, and I used to say, you know, you really cannot speak French if you do not know any French words. You just have to know some. And it may be the best way to do it is to just memorize them. So it's not to say that memorization is not worthwhile. It certainly is for certain things. But at any rate, across the course of the curriculum, it starts out more hands-on, more multidisciplinary in the village school. And then as it goes on, we try to continue to have it be as experiential and multidisciplinary as possible. And in some places we can really do that. And in some places it's just harder to do. But there is a continuum there that we are trying to embrace. And we also realize that certain subjects lend themselves more to experiential methods than others do. So I can't imagine how you would, for example, run a drama program with no experiences. That wouldn't make any sense. Whereas other things, such as, you know, as I say, memorizing French irregular verbs, I honestly don't know a very experiential way of doing that. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you so I was a French major at North Carolina, and in theory did very well, but when I then went to take my master's degree in Paris the following year, I discovered I really could not speak French, despite having gotten top marks in French. The problem was that the entire program, as in many undergraduate programs, was about reading and writing, and there was actually no speaking involved other than listening to the professor speak. So that's an example of where taking a too much of a book learning approach does not pay off. So, our goal in the village is to build the strongest possible foundation for success in the upper school and beyond. Now we come to my vision of where we want to be. So I explained this to the faculty a couple of weeks ago. I'm actually competitive, and one of my few frustrations about education is there's not enough competition. That it's, you know, it's, you know, you don't have anybody to beat. So, I know it's not my best point, but anyway, so I try to say, well, so let's put it into a vision into the competitive framework. So here's what I'd like to see at Chadwick. I'd like to see every motivated, interested, smart student who wants to be challenged, who's up for a challenge, who's up for taking initiative, who could possibly get to Chadwick School geographically to want to come there. I want every kid in the South Bay to want to come to Chadwick. That our program is so dynamic, so engaging, so challenging, so multifaceted, so clearly preparing them for the future that they will say they died and went to heaven when they went to Chadwick. That's one. Thank you. The second big component is teachers. I want every innovative, child-centered, caring, thoughtful, dynamic, collaborative teacher in the world want at some point in their career to spend some time at Chadwick School. That this is the pinnacle of their career. That at some point, if they're lucky enough, they will be able to come to Palos Verdes and teach at Chadwick School, because the community of educators and students and parents there is the kind that will foster growth in their career, that this will be a great career move for them personally as well as professionally. I want everybody in the world to want to say, I want to come to Chadwick, but only teachers of a certain kind, and of the kind that I just mentioned. Not every teacher, but ones that are really the Chadwick brand. This past year, in collaboration with Chadwick International, we put together traits of a great Chadwick teacher in order so that we could be clear when we were hiring people what we were actually looking for. And it's a list of 6 or 7 traits. The first 2 are student-centered, which means that they really want to get to know the students as people, but also as scholars, that they get to understand the intellectual workings of the student as well as the emotional and social aspects, and also that they are collaborative, that they want to work with other people, because that's what really makes the strong education, is the collaboration amongst the teachers that you can have in a small setting. So, what kind of students what is it we want our students to be able to do at the end? What kind of program do we want to have? We want to have a program that Mrs. Chadwick would be proud of, and I must say I was so happy to hear a couple of people mention Mrs. Chadwick. We want to have a program that Mrs. Chadwick that would be proud of, and that will also meet our core competencies and those kinds of skills that Tony Wagner talked about that our students are going to need for the future. Our students need to understand the knowledge and skills and habits of mind that they are working to develop. They need to be able to establish lofty personal goals. I think my biggest takeaway from high school was expectations. That I came out of high school with a set of expectations. I had a sense of what excellence really looked like, and while I might never achieve it, I always knew, or have always had a sense of what it was. I want our program to be such that it engages our children in real-world problems. That it is not divorced, that there's not something they're learning about in a book, and then sometime later maybe they apply it. There's ways of them learning it in that they apply it right on the spot. Mrs. Chadwick talked about habituation rather than preparation. We want them to be able to do what the experts in the field actually do. So that means for me, for example, I'd like to see a decrease in textbooks and an increase in real live primary sources and data and real live experiences where the students are actually dealing with the real meat of the thing as opposed to somebody else's sort of version of it. Because we're trying to create students who are going to think for themselves and create knowledge for themselves and for others. I want to see a program which is really challenging for our students, and the program that I've just described I think would be really challenging. This is the farthest thing possible from dumbing down. This is smartening up. Because every student, as Mrs. Chadwick said, has certain passions and interests and abilities that are latent, and if we can tap into those, if we can get that student engaged, if we can get that student interested and motivated, it's amazing what they will do. You've seen that in your own children. You've seen that in other people. There was a slide up here about cats. Anybody who saw cats at the middle school last year, I would have sworn that was absolutely impossible for middle school students to do, and they did it. It was phenomenal. And our students have done this in every area of school life. We see students do things that at some point you would have said, that's just not possible. Second graders just can't do that, and they do it. Because we've tapped into their inner motivation, and then they will work themselves to death and not think it's work, right? I mean, that's what they do. Once they get excited about it, they are off the clock. It does not matter once they become engaged. So I want our program to be one that challenges and excites our students so that they will experience the joy of learning that Mrs. Chadwick was really so interested in, and experience intrinsic motivation. Not just for external rewards like test scores and grades, which are good and which are needed, but that they themselves are highly motivated. They need to be able to reflect upon what they're doing and then transfer it to a new situation. Because let's face it, life is not a lot like English class. It's just not. We must be learning something in English class that we are going to transfer into some other area of life. Life is not sitting in a group, in a room for 45 minutes with a bunch of other people on a set topic. It's not the way it works. So we need to have students who are able to reflect and then are consciously thinking about how they're going to apply what they've learned in another context. They obviously have to have a firm grasp of the big ideas. One of the sad things, I was making a joke about the biology thing, it's really kind of sad, because I can remember some of the phases of mitosis and meiosis. I remember the term prophase, anaphase, maybe a few other ones. I haven't the slightest idea what they mean. I don't actually know the difference between meiosis and mitosis, which is shameful. The fact of the matter is, the way it was taught, I learned a bunch of stuff that I then spit back on a test, but I missed the big idea. I have a vague idea that one of them is sexual and one of them is asexual, but that's about as far as it goes. And I could be wrong about that. They obviously have to have very well-developed cognitive skills, the ability to process information. We definitely want them to be, fluent is not a term that's used much anymore in global language departments, but we certainly want them to be capable in at least one other language, and preferably more than one. We also want them to be fluent in other areas. We want them to be fluent in statistics. They should understand, they have a good walking around knowledge of statistics and probability. They should have a walk around knowledge of art history. I went to mini school night the other night and heard Dr. Sandy Piercy talk about the goal of art history. I was inspired. She said, I want every one of our students to be able to walk around and read their environment, to walk down the street of any city and read the buildings and understand what they mean, where they came from, and appreciate that, not just in museums, but all around, wherever they go, because there is art and architecture everywhere we go. I thought, how wonderful is that? And I am lacking in that. I think our kids should be able to read music. I do. I think it's a great skill. I think it helps train the brain, and it also gives them appreciation of another area of human endeavor that is uplifting and will provide them with joy throughout their lives. Our kids need to have international understanding and empathy for other people. They need to be able to understand and hang on to their own core values, but also deal with people who either have different core values or who express them in other ways. This was one of our great learnings and continues to be one of the great learnings for our school, to have another campus in South Korea. To understand that, in fact, while we all share the same goals, it takes work to understand each other. Even when we're using the same words, we may be interpreting them differently. That what I consider to be honesty is viewed differently in another culture, and it's not that one of us is right and one of us is wrong. These are cultures that have grown up over hundreds and thousands of years. And we need to understand that and appreciate that as still a relatively new nation, that the fact that we think it doesn't make it right. It's possible someone else could have a better or a more nuanced answer than we do. And finally, I want them to leave Chadwick loving the school because of the experience that they've had. I want them to go out energized, excited, disciplined, but also prepared to make a difference in college and beyond. That's the kind of program that we want. So we want to have every great student in the South Bay wants to come to Chadwick School. We want every great teacher around the world to come here, and a program that delivers those kinds of outcomes. We have started down that road. And we have undertaken so many things in the last few years that it may be that it's not apparent as to what the method to the madness is. So I want to take just another minute or two to tell you some of the steps that we've taken, and now that I've given you the framework, maybe now it will be clear. First of all, we're really working on the mastery of skills and the coherence of the K through 12 curriculum. That's why we established the core competencies to have a target to shoot at. That's why Dr. Deborah Dowling was brought in to oversee the entire curriculum. That's why Jackie Cameron was brought in to be the curriculum coordinator in the village, because we've never had a curriculum coordinator before. And she is building upon her great experience. She spent 4 years at Chadwick International in the IB-based program there that is heavily, heavily planned and integrated, and she's bringing that to Chadwick School. This year, on October 6th, is going to be devoted as the day the children have off. The faculty is going to be working on learning about what each other are doing on a personal basis. It's why Kimberly Tapman was appointed to be the village math specialist, because she's also the chair of the math department in the middle and upper schools. So now we have one person overseeing the entire math program. In the grades 5 through 8, we have teachers that are working together to make sure that we bridge the gap between the village school and the middle school and make that transition more seamless. It's why we have haiku, and as we get more expert at using haiku, you will be able to see what we are doing. We want to share those outcomes with you as well as what we're doing. This fall, for the first time, we had 16 outdoor ed instructors came and met with the teaching faculty at Chadwick. And I don't know why we hadn't thought of this before, but at any rate, they were here to get ready for the 10th grade trip. They came. Among these 16 outdoor ed instructors, they had been on 90 trips total with Chadwick students, and each trip is roughly 100 straight hours long. So we brought in a group of people who really knew our kids intimately to work with the classroom teachers who knew them in a completely different way. That's bringing together our program and enables us to talk about the skills. And then in the evening, they met with the athletic coaches, and needless to say, there's a lot in common between outdoor education and athletics, but never the twain had met. So that we are beginning to go down this road. In terms of excellence in teaching, we developed the traits of the great Chadwick teachers. One of the real reasons that we began a second campus in South Korea was in order to be able to attract international teachers and teachers with best practices from around the world. At CI, we've been enormously successful in doing that. We get literally hundreds of applications from teachers around the world who want to come to CI. That's the same thing we want here. Some of you are aware that 3 of our top people from CI have actually come to Chadwick this year. Not just Jackie Cameron, but her husband, Wyatt, and then also Bree Bunsen is teaching in the 2nd grade, and she's also a Chadwick alum. We want to be able to be a magnet for great teachers from around the world. Our teachers this year are joining together in professional learning communities, which is committees that are studying everything from social and the affective aspects of learning to the International Baccalaureate program. So we are continuing to move ahead on both the teaching side and the programmatic side. On the reputation side, which is, I think, what really, in the end, I want to see Chadwick be a leader. I want to see everybody nationally know the Chadwick brand, know that Chadwick is known for excellence of its student body, its programs, and its teachers. I see great opportunities for that just in the last few years. We joined Round Square. We're one of only 5 or 6 schools in the United States in Round Square. We were invited to join the World Leading Schools Association, which is Eton, and a number of other leading Western schools, as well as 50 schools in China. I can tell you that our presence in South Korea has been an amazing, I get calls. I was just mentioning to people at our table, we now have 5 offers on the table from China to start another school in China. We get calls all the time from people who want to know how this is working, and when they hear what's happening, they are, I think, more amazed than they were. So I want the higher bar and the distinctive strengths of Chadwick graduates to be known everywhere. I want our parents to fully understand it, prospective parents to understand it, and colleges and universities to understand that when a Chadwick student applies to that college, they know that they're getting somebody who has really been challenged, has in multiple aspects, and can not only do well on standardized tests and in getting good grades, but that in fact the way that they have achieved those grades has been through experience, that they have been tested both cognitively and in other manners. The challenges facing all American schools these days are great. Everyone is marshaling resources in a slowly recovering economy. We're all determining what should be taught and how best to teach it. We are dealing with the challenges and opportunities of technology, and we all have this feeling with the globe shrinking, the competition that our students are going to face in the future is increasing. But we have certain advantages at Chadwick. We're one school across 3 divisions. In fact, we're one school across 6 divisions on 2 continents, working together and learning from each other. We have both the intimacy and the teaching power of small groups and close relationships, but now we have a global reach, a global perspective, and global resources. Most of all, as an independent school, we have the freedom to choose and to act, to decide upon our vision and to follow it. I'd like to close with some observations from John Scherer, who's a political scientist at Santa Clara. The future is not some place we are going, but one we are creating. The paths are not to be found, but made. And the activity of making them changes both the maker and the destination. I look forward to working together with you all to create the best possible future for our students, both during their time at Chadwick and in what I hope will be the long and very meaningful lives thereafter. Thank you.